The 1960s are often remembered as a golden age for American car design. Muscle cars like the Mustang and Camaro were born, and bold designs reigned supreme. But not every car from the era was a success. Some models were either bizarre, impractical, or simply out of step with what consumers wanted. Here are the 13 worst and silliest American cars from the 1960s, vehicles that missed the mark and left us scratching our heads. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a journey back to a time when muscle cars ruled the American roads, when the roar of an engine could stir the soul, and when every manufacturer seemed to be locked in a high-octane race to deliver the next great automotive icon. In this golden era of muscle, amidst the legends like the Mustang, Camaro, and Charger, there emerged a peculiar contender, the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler. Ah, the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler. Its very name conjures images of speed and power, a machine that was intended to evoke the raw, tire-burning aggression of NASCAR racing. It was designed to be more than just a car. It was supposed to be an embodiment of American muscle, a bridge between the racetrack and the open road. However, when it finally rolled off the assembly line, what the world saw was something entirely different. A car that, instead of striking fear and excitement into the hearts of muscle car enthusiasts, evoked puzzled glances and more than a few smirks. Let's talk about the design. In an era where sleek lines and aggressive stances were the hallmarks of a great muscle car, the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler was, well, a bit of an oddball. Its proportions were slightly off-kilter, with a body that appeared stretched in some areas and scrunched in others, giving it a look that was less race-ready beast and more awkwardly muscular. The balance between power and elegance, so critical in the design of cars like the Dodge Challenger or the Pontiac GTO, was lost in translation with the Cyclone Spoiler. Instead, what we got was a car that looked more like it had been sketched in a comic book than forged in the fires of automotive glory. But perhaps the most memorable aspect of the Cyclone Spoiler was its unapologetic, almost gaudy use of color. Mercury, in an effort to distinguish the car from its competitors, decided that the best way to capture the public's attention was to make it bright. Very bright. And so they slathered the car in clashing color schemes with vibrant reds and oranges fighting for dominance against blues and whites, often accompanied by oversized decals that screamed NASCAR in a way that felt more like a novelty than a nod to serious racing. Instead of looking like a high-performance machine, the Cyclone Spoiler resembled something that might have burst forth from Saturday morning cartoons, its aesthetic more suited to a child's toy than a road warrior. It was a bold choice, to say the least, but one that didn't quite land. While the world of muscle cars was known for its flamboyant styling, there was a line between confident swagger and outright silliness. Unfortunately, the Cyclone Spoiler found itself on the wrong side of that line. Muscle car enthusiasts, those discerning gearheads who lived for the purity of performance and design, looked at the Cyclone Spoiler and saw a vehicle that was trying too hard. It was loud, yes, but not in the way that turned heads out of admiration. Rather, it was the kind of loud that caused people to laugh or shake their heads, wondering what Mercury had been thinking. And yet, despite its comical exterior, there was no denying the car had power. Beneath the hood, the Cyclone Spoiler was equipped with the muscle to back up its NASCAR-inspired heritage. It packed a punch with engines like the 429 Cobra Jet, capable of serious horsepower that could hold its own against many of its contemporaries. This was a car that, at least on paper, had the credentials to be a contender. The performance was there, the racing pedigree was there, but the design seemed to sabotage everything. For many muscle car enthusiasts, the Mercury Cyclone Spoiler was a case of wasted potential. Here was a vehicle with serious mechanical capabilities, a car that could have been a true NASCAR-inspired legend had it only embraced a more refined, aggressive design ethos. But instead, it became something of a laughingstock, a powerful machine trapped inside a goofy costume. It was as if Mercury, in its eagerness to stand out, had forgotten the golden rule of muscle car culture: respect the balance between form and function. In trying to be both a race car and a showpiece, the Cyclone Spoiler failed to fully satisfy either role. Over time, the Cyclone spoiler became something of an automotive oddity, remembered more for its cartoonish styling than its performance capabilities. It didn't make the lasting impact that Mercury had hoped for. Instead, it drifted into the background as a kind of curious footnote in the annals of muscle car history. Collectors today may look back at it with a mix of nostalgia and bemusement. Ah, the Cadillac Fleetwood Eldorado, a name that to many still resonates with the grandeur of a bygone era in American luxury cars. It was a vehicle meant to represent the pinnacle of opulence, a rolling embodiment of prestige and wealth. Introduced in a time when bigger was better, the Eldorado was Cadillac's proud flagship, aimed at affluent buyers who craved not just transportation, but a symbol of their success. Yet somewhere along the way, the pursuit of luxury turned into excess, and the Fleetwood Eldorado became less of an elegant statement and more of an unwieldy caricature of itself. Let's begin with the design, the very thing that should have been the Eldorado's crowning glory, but instead became its downfall. In an era when sleek and graceful lines were beginning to define luxury coupes, the Eldorado took the opposite route, embracing a bloated, over-the-top aesthetic that was impossible to ignore. From the moment you laid eyes on it, the sheer size of the car dominated the senses. At nearly 19 feet long, it was an enormous presence on the road, dwarfing other vehicles and commanding attention in a way that felt more intimidating than inviting. The exaggerated front end, with its imposing grille and extended hood, was a hallmark of Cadillac's desire to make a statement. But instead of coming across as powerful or refined, it gave the car an ungainly, almost cartoonish appearance. It was as though the designers had taken the concept of luxury and stretched it far beyond reason, creating a car that was massive for the sake of being massive. The Eldorado's proportions felt out of balance, as if it was trying too hard to flaunt its size, forgetting that true elegance often lies in subtlety. Behind the wheel, the Eldorado's size wasn't just a design flaw, it was a practical nightmare. Maneuvering this behemoth was a challenge even for seasoned drivers. Narrow streets, tight parking spots, and sharp corners became sources of frustration, as the Eldorado's immense bulk made it feel more like steering a boat than a car. Cadillac had packed the Eldorado with power, sure, but no amount of horsepower could overcome the awkwardness of its proportions. The car was difficult to handle, sluggish in its response, and felt out of place anywhere other than a long, straight highway where its size didn't get in the way. What's perhaps most ironic is that the Eldorado was packed with features that, in any other vehicle, might have been the talk of the town. Cadillac, as the premier luxury brand in America, had always been known for pushing the envelope when it came to innovation and comfort. The Eldorado was no exception, offering cutting-edge technology and plush interiors that would make any driver feel like royalty. From leather upholstery and wood grain accents to advanced sound systems and climate controls, the Fleetwood Eldorado was dripping with the finest amenities of its time. And yet, all of these luxurious features couldn't save the car from the perception that it was more of a showpiece than a practical vehicle. It was a car designed to be seen in, to make an impression at a country club parking lot, or slowly cruising down Main Street. But beyond the initial spectacle, it didn't offer much in terms of real-world usability. For all its glamour, the Eldorado was impractical, cumbersome, and ultimately out of sync with what luxury car buyers were beginning to look for. Vehicles that combined style with substance, not just size with extravagance. As the 1970s rolled on, the automotive world was shifting, and so were consumer tastes. The oil crisis brought fuel efficiency into sharper focus, and even luxury car buyers started to rethink their love affair with oversized, gas-guzzling land yachts. The era of bigger is better was fading, and the Fleetwood Eldorado, with its over-the-top design and impractical size, began to feel like a relic of a different time. While other manufacturers started to streamline their offerings, introducing sleeker, more efficient luxury coupes, Cadillac's Eldorado remained a holdover from an age that had already begun to pass. Of course, there are those who look back on the Fleetwood Eldorado with a sense of nostalgia, seeing in its bloated design a kind of charm that modern cars simply don't possess. For those who appreciate the excesses of 1970s American luxury, the Eldorado is a monument to a time when car makers weren't afraid to go all out, to build something extravagant simply because they could. And in that sense, the Eldorado has become a symbol of Cadillac's willingness to push boundaries, to test the limits of what luxury could mean. But for the broader public, the Eldorado's legacy is more complicated. Yes, it was a powerful, feature-packed machine, but it was also a car that failed to evolve with the times. Its poor design choices and impracticality ultimately overshadowed its mechanical prowess and luxurious appointments. The Chevrolet Chevelle 300, a name that, to the uninitiated, might evoke visions of the iconic Chevelle lineup, a beloved symbol of American muscle, speed, and style. The Chevelle, after all, was one of the most celebrated cars of the 1960s and early 1970s, synonymous with power, performance, and that ineffable sense of cool that defined a generation of American automobiles. But the Chevelle 300? Well, it tells a different story. A story of simplicity, compromise, and missed opportunity. In an era when muscle cars were all the rage and automakers were battling for dominance on the street and the track, Chevrolet's decision to introduce a stripped-down, economy version of the Chevelle seemed at first glance like a practical move. After all, not everyone could afford the high-powered, high-priced models that defined the muscle car wars of the 1960s. The Chevelle 300 was aimed at a different audience, those looking for a more affordable, no-frills version of the beloved Chevelle, a car that would get them from point A to point B without the flashy extras. But therein lay the problem. What made the Chevelle such an icon wasn't just its ability to ferry passengers around town, it was the way it did so, with flair, power, and style. The Chevelle 300, on the other hand, stripped away much of what made the Chevelle lineup so special. Gone were the bold design elements that turned heads at every stoplight. Gone were the roaring engines that made the car feel alive beneath your hands. What was left was a plain, underwhelming commuter car that seemed to bear only the name of its famous sibling, but none of the spirit. Let's start with the design. The Chevelle 300 wasn't ugly, but it was certainly plain. Where the more powerful SS models boasted aggressive lines, sporty detailing, and an undeniable presence, the Chevelle 300 opted for a more utilitarian approach. The body was simple, almost boxy, with little to no ornamentation. It was the kind of car that, if you parked it on the street, would blend in with the background, unnoticed. There was nothing about the Chevelle 300's appearance that suggested it was part of the same family as the muscle-bound, road-dominating Chevelle that were burning rubber all over America. Performance, too, was where the Chevelle 300 fell short of its brawnier counterparts. While the more powerful Chevelle were packing V8 engines capable of thrilling speed and acceleration, the Chevelle 300 was offered with more modest engine options, including a basic inline-6 and small V8s that, while reliable, lacked the punch that muscle car enthusiasts craved. For those who cared little about performance and were simply in the market for an economical daily driver, this wasn't necessarily a deal-breaker. But for anyone who had even a glimmer of excitement about driving, the Chevelle 300 was bound to disappoint. In a sense, the Chevelle 300 was trapped between two worlds. It carried the Chevelle name, which brought with it expectations of performance and style, yet it was built to appeal to a different market, those looking for an affordable, practical vehicle. Unfortunately, in trying to balance these two objectives, the Chevelle 300 ended up satisfying neither group. Muscle car enthusiasts found it lacking in excitement, while those looking for a basic economy car had plenty of other options to choose from, many of which came without the baggage of being compared to far more thrilling siblings. It's important to remember that the 1960s were a time of extremes in the automotive world. On one end of the spectrum were high-performance, gas-guzzling muscle cars like the Chevelle SS 396, designed to dominate both the track and the street with their raw power. On the other end were the increasingly popular economy cars, which, spurred on by a growing awareness of fuel efficiency and practicality, were becoming the choice for more and more consumers. The Chevelle 300, however, found itself caught in the middle, lacking both the performance to thrill and the economy to truly compete in a market that was starting to demand more efficiency from its vehicles. It wasn't that the Chevelle 300 was a bad car. It was reliable, affordable, and functional. But in a time when cars were as much about personal expression as they were about transportation, the Chevelle 300's lack of character was its greatest flaw. It was, simply put, a car that didn't inspire much passion. And when you slap the name Chevelle on a vehicle, passion is exactly what people expect. For those who grew up lusting after the muscular lines of the Chevelle SS, the rumble of its engine, and the thrill of knowing that they were behind the wheel of a true performance machine, the Chevelle 300 must have felt like an imposter, a vehicle that looked the part from a distance, but couldn't deliver the goods once you got behind the wheel. The DeSoto Adventurer, its very name evokes images of boldness, speed, and a car ready to take on the world with all the flair and performance that a true luxury automobile should possess. But the reality of the Adventurer was far less exciting than its name might suggest. Instead of being a daring foray into the world of high-performance luxury cars, the Adventurer was a misstep, a car that symbolized the waning days of the DeSoto brand and the larger struggles of American automakers in an era of rapid change. It was a car that, despite its aspirations, missed the mark entirely. When DeSoto introduced the Adventurer in the mid-1950s, the American car market was at its peak, filled with optimism and excitement. The post-war boom had created an insatiable appetite for automobiles, and brands like Cadillac, Lincoln, and Chrysler were pushing the boundaries of what luxury and performance could be. DeSoto, long seen as a brand sandwiched awkwardly between Chrysler and Dodge, wanted to carve out a niche for itself, positioning the Adventurer as a luxury performance car that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best of them. On paper, the Adventurer had everything going for it. It was billed as a high-performance luxury coupe, a car that combined speed and power with the sophistication that the growing upper middle class craved. Its V8 engines packed a punch, at least in earlier models, and DeSoto didn't skimp on the technological features or the interior comforts that defined a luxury car. But where the Adventurer faltered was in its execution. For all its potential, the car was burdened with one fatal flaw: its oversized, heavy body. The weight of the Adventurer was a problem from the start. While other luxury performance cars were beginning to embrace the sleeker, more streamlined designs that characterized the late 1950s and early 1960s, DeSoto seemed stuck in a time warp, saddling the Adventurer with a body that was both bloated and outdated. The car's excessive bulk made it sluggish, robbing it of the very performance edge it was supposed to have. Where rivals like Cadillac and Lincoln were offering nimble, powerful machines that could glide down the road with ease, the Adventurer felt more like a lumbering giant, struggling to keep up with the demands of the modern driver. In an age when the space-age aesthetic was coming into vogue, with cars becoming lower, sleeker, and more futuristic, the Adventurer's design felt clunky. Its lines were too heavy, its proportions awkward, and its styling, once cutting edge in the early 50s, had quickly fallen out of step with contemporary trends. By the time the 1960 Adventurer hit the market, it already looked like a relic from the past. While competitors were embracing the future, DeSoto seemed to be clinging to the tail end of an era that had already moved on. This was particularly evident in the car's front end. While other luxury cars of the time were experimenting with new and exciting grille designs, the Adventurer's face remained overly bulky and lacked the sophistication that consumers were beginning to demand. The overly pronounced fenders and high, wide grille gave it a look that was more reminiscent of the excesses of the early 1950s than the cleaner, more refined styles that were becoming the norm by 1960. It was a car that seemed out of sync with the times, and in the fast-moving world of automotive design, that was a fatal flaw. Under the hood, while the earlier Adventurer models boasted impressive power, by 1960, even that advantage had begun to fade. The engines were still strong, but they struggled to compensate for the car's excessive weight. Acceleration felt sluggish, and while it could cruise comfortably, it didn't have the punch that buyers expected from a performance-oriented luxury car. As a result, the Adventurer ended up in a kind of no man's land, too heavy and cumbersome to appeal to performance enthusiasts, yet not refined or stylish enough to win over luxury buyers who might otherwise have been drawn to Cadillac or Lincoln. By the time the 1960 Adventurer rolled off the assembly line, DeSoto as a brand was already on the decline. The company had been struggling to find its identity within the larger Chrysler empire for years, and the Adventurer, which had once been positioned as the pinnacle of DeSoto's lineup, wasn't enough to turn things around. Sales were dwindling, and the writing was on the wall. DeSoto's glory days were behind it, and the Adventurer, once a symbol of high hopes, had become a symbol of the brand's inability to adapt to the changing market. DeSoto's decline wasn't solely the Adventurer's fault, of course. The automotive industry was undergoing a period of profound transformation, with shifting consumer tastes, new technologies, and a growing emphasis on efficiency and innovation. DeSoto, caught between Chrysler's high-end Imperial division and the more affordable Dodge. The 1962 Ford Thunderbird, a car that, by the time it arrived, had strayed far from the sleek, sporty origins that made it an American icon in the 1950s. The Thunderbird name, once synonymous with power, speed, and style, had morphed into something altogether different by its third generation. What had begun as a nimble, personal sports car in 1955 had, by 1962, turned into a bloated, overly ambitious luxury vehicle. The Thunderbird of this era was emblematic of a broader trend in the automotive industry at the time, the shift from performance to excess, from substance to style. But for those who had fallen in love with the original Thunderbird, the 1962 model represented the worst of this transformation. The first-generation Thunderbird had captured the American imagination with its clean lines, compact size, and powerful V8 engine. It was Ford's answer to the Chevrolet Corvette, a personal sports car that offered performance and elegance in equal measure. It was sporty, sleek, and just a little bit rebellious, an embodiment of mid-century American optimism and the desire for freedom on the open road. But as the years went on, the Thunderbird began to change, slowly evolving from a two-seater sports car into a larger, more luxurious four-seater. By the time the 1962 model hit the streets, that transformation was complete, and the Thunderbird had lost much of the identity that had made it so appealing in the first place. One glance at the 1962 Thunderbird, and it's easy to see just how far the car had strayed from its roots. The long, sweeping body, which seemed to stretch out endlessly, gave the car an ungainly appearance. The Thunderbird had become bigger, heavier, and more cumbersome, with an elongated profile that looked more suited to a luxury yacht than a sports car. While other cars of the era were embracing a more streamlined aerodynamic design, the Thunderbird seemed content to bulk up, as though trying to compensate for its lost performance with sheer size. The styling, too, was a far cry from the sleek elegance of the original. The 1962 Thunderbird was festooned with chrome accents, the kind of excessive ornamentation that had become all too common in the American luxury market of the early 1960s. From the oversized grille to the heavy chrome trim that ran along the sides of the car, the Thunderbird seemed to be trying too hard to impress. What had once been a symbol of understated elegance had become a rolling display of automotive opulence, where flash took precedence over function. The front end of the car, with its wide rectangular grille and large, round headlights, gave the Thunderbird a somewhat bug-eyed appearance. It lacked the aggressive, confident stance of the earlier models, and instead came off as heavy and awkward. The rear end was equally over the top, with the distinctive bullet-bird tail fins that were meant to evoke a sense of speed and motion, but ended up looking more like unnecessary flourishes on an already over-designed car. In short, the 1962 Thunderbird was trying too hard to be everything at once: a luxury car, a sports car, and a status symbol. But in doing so, it lost the simplicity and focus that had made the original Thunderbird so beloved. Underneath all the chrome and flash, the Thunderbird's performance had also taken a hit. The car was undeniably powerful, with its big V8 engine providing plenty of horsepower, but the weight of the car made it sluggish and unresponsive. It could still cruise comfortably on the highway, but it no longer offered the exhilarating driving experience that the original Thunderbird had promised. Handling had become a secondary concern, sacrificed on the altar of luxury and comfort. The Thunderbird, once a car that begged to be driven, now seemed content to coast along, more at home in a suburban driveway than on the open road. The interior of the 1962 Thunderbird, while luxurious, further illustrated the car's transformation. The cockpit-like feel of the original had been replaced by a plush, almost gaudy interior, with oversized seats and an array of gadgets that made it feel more like a living room on wheels than a driver's car. While some might have appreciated the comfort and the array of luxury features, it was clear that the Thunderbird had abandoned any pretense of being a performance vehicle. It was a personal luxury car through and through, but for many that wasn't enough. The Thunderbird had lost its edge. This wasn't just a case of a car getting bigger and fancier. The transformation of the Thunderbird was indicative of a larger trend in the American automotive industry in the early 1960s. As consumers became more affluent, car manufacturers began to focus more on luxury, comfort, and status symbols, often at the expense of performance and driving pleasure. The Thunderbird, once a trendsetter, had fallen victim to this shift. It had become a reflection of a culture obsessed with excess. The Chevrolet Corvair Greenbrier. Now there's a name that evokes a complicated legacy. It was a vehicle that stood as a testament to both the ambition and the missteps of Chevrolet during the 1960s. Based on the ill-fated Corvair, a car that had already garnered controversy for its dangerous handling characteristics and dubious engineering decisions, the Greenbrier van took those challenges and multiplied them. It was an attempt to expand the Corvair line into the growing van market, but instead of addressing the issues that plagued the Corvair, the Greenbrier only amplified them. It was a van that was difficult to drive, woefully underpowered, and, perhaps most concerning, prone to tipping over. For many, it became a symbol of the dangers that could arise when innovation went unchecked by practicality and safety. When Chevrolet launched the Corvair line in the late 1950s, it was heralded as a bold step into the future. The Corvair was designed to be a small, lightweight rear-engine vehicle, something that would differentiate Chevrolet from its competition. It was innovative for sure, but it also came with a host of engineering challenges. The rear-mounted air-cooled engine gave the Corvair a unique driving experience, but it also created stability problems that would later come to haunt the car, as famously documented in Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed. The book's revelations about the Corvair's handling flaws, particularly its tendency to oversteer and lose control, would forever tarnish the reputation of the Corvair brand. But before Nader's expose, Chevrolet pushed forward with the Greenbrier, eager to expand the Corvair's influence into the van and truck segments. The Greenbrier, introduced in 1961, was Chevrolet's attempt to compete with the growing popularity of utility vans like the Volkswagen Type 2, the VW bus. The idea was sound in theory, taking the Corvair's rear engine, air-cooled platform, and using it as the basis for a versatile van that could serve families, businesses, and adventurers alike. But in practice, the Greenbrier was riddled with issues that made it both impractical and, more alarmingly, unsafe. One of the most glaring problems with the Greenbrier was its handling. While the rear engine layout of the Corvair might have made for an interesting driving dynamic in a car, it became much more precarious in the tall, top-heavy design of a van. The Greenbrier's high center of gravity combined with the rear engine placement led to a tendency to tip over in sharp turns or during evasive maneuvers. The same rear suspension issues that plagued the Corvair car, the lack of a proper stabilizer bar, which made the rear wheels tuck under during hard cornering, were present in the Greenbrier, but amplified by the van's larger and taller frame. The result was a vehicle that felt unstable on the road, particularly when carrying heavy loads or driving in windy conditions. It wasn't uncommon for drivers to experience unnerving moments of instability, where it felt like the van might tip over at any second. The Greenbrier also suffered from a lack of power, which made driving it an exercise in patience. The air-cooled, flat-six engine that powered the Greenbrier was underwhelming at best. It produced just enough horsepower to get the van moving, but once fully loaded, the engine struggled. Climbing hills or even maintaining highway speeds became a challenge, especially when compared to other vans of the era. This sluggish performance made the Greenbrier a chore to drive, particularly in situations where more power and torque were needed. While it might have been fine for short city commutes, the Greenbrier fell short as a long-distance hauler or a utility van that could handle demanding jobs. And then there was the matter of safety, or rather the lack thereof. By the time the Greenbrier was introduced, Chevrolet had already begun receiving complaints about the Corvair's handling, but instead of addressing those concerns, the issues were largely ignored in the development of the van. The Greenbrier inherited the Corvair's poor weight distribution, with too much weight over the rear axle and not enough up front. This imbalance led to unpredictable handling and a tendency for the front end to feel too light, especially when cornering. Drivers reported that the Greenbrier could feel like it was floating, or that the steering was unresponsive, a disconcerting experience in a vehicle that was already prone to tipping. The Greenbrier's safety issues weren't just a matter of poor handling. The van's build quality and lack of modern safety features also contributed to its dangerous reputation. At a time when the American public was becoming more aware of vehicle safety, thanks in no small part to Nader's groundbreaking work, the Greenbrier's shortcomings became harder to ignore. The first-generation Dodge Charger, introduced in 1966, occupies an unusual place in the pantheon of American muscle cars. When most people think of the Dodge Charger, they conjure images of the sleek, aggressive machines that tore up the streets in the late 60s and early 70s. However, the original 1966 Charger was a far cry from the icon it would later become. Instead of the muscular, sharp-edged design that became synonymous with the Charger name, the first generation arrived with a fastback profile that looked more like an automotive experiment than a muscle car. With its massive, sweeping rear window and bulky proportions, the 1966 Charger was polarizing and, to many muscle car enthusiasts, downright awkward. In the mid-1960s, Dodge found itself in an interesting position. It was still looking for a signature vehicle that could capture the spirit of the muscle car movement, which was just beginning to take hold across the United States. Pontiac had the GTO, Ford had the Mustang, and Chevrolet had the Camaro on the horizon. Dodge needed something bold to stand out in the increasingly competitive market, and the Charger was their answer. The car was meant to be a fusion of performance and style, a fastback coupe that could capture the hearts of muscle car fans while also being practical enough for everyday driving. But in trying to cater to both worlds, the Charger ended up being a bit of a design oddity, caught between its ambitious concept and its awkward execution. The first thing that grabs your attention when you see a 1966 Charger is the fastback design. While fastbacks were trendy during the mid-1960s, thanks to the success of the Mustang and other sportier cars, Dodge's interpretation of the fastback style was much more extreme. The Charger's roofline sloped down dramatically into the rear, creating a long, sweeping curve that culminated in a huge rear window that almost engulfed the entire back half of the car. From certain angles, this design gave the Charger a spaceship-like appearance, which wasn't necessarily a compliment at the time. It was big, bulky, and decidedly unconventional, traits that didn't sit well with muscle car purists who were looking for a more aggressive, street-ready machine. That oversized rear window, which was meant to give the car a futuristic, aerodynamic look, ended up being one of the most criticized aspects of the first-generation Charger. While Dodge likely thought it would set the car apart from its competitors, the window's sheer size and odd shape made the car look unbalanced. Instead of the taut, purposeful lines that muscle cars were known for, the Charger seemed to sag at the back, as if its design couldn't quite handle its own ambition. It was a departure from the more traditional muscle car look, which emphasized sharp angles, bold stances, and a compact, aggressive silhouette. The Charger's expansive rear glass and fastback profile just didn't fit the mold of what many enthusiasts were looking for in a muscle car. Inside the car, Dodge tried to infuse the Charger with a sense of luxury and futuristic flair. The interior was spacious and well-appointed, with unique touches like 4 individual bucket seats and a full-length center console that ran from the front to the rear. The dashboard was ahead of its time, with electroluminescent gauges that glowed in a soft, futuristic light. These details gave the Charger a more upscale, almost space-age feel, which again felt at odds with the muscle car ethos. Muscle cars were supposed to be raw, visceral, and performance-focused. The Charger's interior, while impressive in its own right, seemed more appropriate for a grand touring car than a tire-smoking street machine. Performance-wise, the 1966 Charger wasn't a complete letdown. Under the hood, buyers could opt for Dodge's range of big block V8 engines, including the legendary 426 Hemi, which delivered an astounding amount of horsepower for the time. The Charger could move, no doubt about that. But even with its powerful engine options, the car's size and weight worked against it. It was heavy, too heavy to compete with the more agile muscle cars of the era. The car's fastback design, which was meant to improve aerodynamics, couldn't fully compensate for its bulk, and it lacked the nimbleness and aggression that defined its competitors. The Charger's handling was also a point of contention. While it could roar down the straightaways with authority, its large size and somewhat unwieldy design made it difficult to maneuver on winding roads or in tight spaces. It felt more like a muscle car trapped in a grand tour's body, a car that was trying to be too many things at once, without fully succeeding in any of them. For muscle car fans who valued simplicity, speed, and sharp handling, the first-generation Charger fell short. The Mercury Monterey, its name evokes a sense of coastal elegance, a shimmering image of a car that should have glided effortlessly down the highways with grace and power. Unfortunately, the reality was far from that. Introduced as a full-size sedan aimed at bridging the gap between Ford's more affordable models and the higher-end Lincoln luxury vehicles, the Monterey seemed poised for greatness. But as it rolled off the assembly lines, its potential was quickly overshadowed by its uninspired design, sluggish performance, and a sense of bulk that seemed to weigh it down both literally and metaphorically. Despite Mercury's ambitions for the Monterey to be a luxurious, desirable vehicle, it instead became a symbol of missed opportunities and fading appeal, struggling to find relevance in an increasingly competitive automotive market. By the time the Monterey nameplate re-emerged in the 1960s, the world of American cars had changed. The post-war boom that had once fueled the growth of massive, chrome-laden sedans was giving way to a new era of sleek muscle cars and compact, European-inspired imports. But the Monterey seemed stuck in an earlier time, as if it hadn't received the memo that the world had moved on. Its design was bland, with an overabundance of chrome that may have worked in the 1950s, but now seemed garish and out of place. The body lines were uninspired, lacking the sculpted elegance of its contemporaries. Where other cars of the era were pushing boundaries and redefining what American automobiles could look like, the Monterey clung to a style that felt tired and dated. Looking at the Monterey, it was hard to escape the feeling that it was trying too hard to be something it simply wasn't. Mercury had aimed for luxury, but what they delivered was a car that felt heavy and cumbersome. The weight of the vehicle was particularly noticeable, not just in its appearance but in its performance as well. Despite its full-size stature and powerful-looking presence, the Monterey was underpowered, with engines that lacked the kind of punch you would expect from a car of its size. Even with available V8 engines under the hood, the car's substantial mass negated much of the power they delivered. Acceleration felt labored, as though the Monterey was always straining against its own bulk. It was a car that looked like it should have been fast and powerful, but on the road it was anything but. The driving experience of the Monterey was equally underwhelming. The heavy body, combined with uninspiring engine performance, made the car feel sluggish and unresponsive. It wasn't nimble, nor did it offer the kind of smooth, luxurious ride you might have expected from a full-size sedan. The suspension, though capable of absorbing bumps in the road, did little to hide the fact that you were essentially piloting a massive, unwieldy vehicle. Handling was far from precise, and the steering felt disconnected, as if the car was too big for its own mechanicals. When muscle cars were taking the automotive world by storm with their raw, unbridled power, and European sedans were offering refined handling, the Monterey seemed stuck in the middle, offering neither. Its exterior styling was another area where the Monterey failed to make an impression. The excessive use of chrome, which might have been eye-catching in the 1950s, was starting to feel like an outdated relic of the past. The body itself was overly conservative, with slab-sided panels that lacked the dramatic curves or aggressive lines that other manufacturers were embracing. Where competitors were turning heads with bold new designs that emphasized power and speed, the Monterey looked like it had missed that memo entirely. It wasn't ugly, but it wasn't memorable either. It was the kind of car that blended into the background, never quite catching the eye or capturing the imagination. Despite its uninspired looks and unimpressive performance, the Monterey did have a few redeeming qualities, the most notable of which was its spacious interior. As a full-size sedan, the Monterey offered plenty of room for passengers and luggage, making it a comfortable vehicle for long trips or family outings. The seats were large and cushioned, providing ample comfort for its occupants, even if the ride itself wasn't particularly exciting. There was a sense of old-school American luxury in the way the cabin was designed, with enough legroom to stretch out and enough space for everyone to ride comfortably. However, even the interior, with its faux wood paneling and vinyl seats, felt more like a dressed-up Ford than a true luxury car. It was comfortable, yes, but not in a way that left a lasting impression. The Oldsmobile Jetfire, a name that evokes the spirit of innovation and ambition during an era when American automakers were racing to push the boundaries of performance and technology. Launched in 1962, the Jetfire was one of the first production cars to feature a turbocharged engine, a bold step that placed it at the forefront of automotive engineering. Yet, despite its forward-thinking design and ambitious technology, the Jetfire quickly became emblematic of the pitfalls that can accompany such innovations. With reliability issues, mechanical flaws, and a design that failed to capture the excitement its name implied, the Jetfire remains a fascinating yet ultimately tragic tale in the annals of automotive history. The concept of turbocharging was still relatively novel in the early 1960s, primarily associated with high-performance racing vehicles rather than everyday consumer cars. Oldsmobile sought to change that narrative with the Jetfire, introducing it as a sporty coupe designed to deliver a thrilling driving experience. Equipped with a 215 cubic inch V8 engine, the Jetfire boasted a turbocharger that was intended to enhance performance significantly. On paper, it was a revolutionary concept, a compact car with the potential for exhilarating speed and power. It was a vision of the future, a promise of what the driving experience could be. However, the execution of the Jetfire's turbocharged engine left much to be desired. While turbocharging promised to deliver higher horsepower without significantly increasing engine size, the technology was still in its infancy. The Jetfire's turbocharger was prone to overheating, leading to a host of reliability issues that plagued the vehicle from its inception. Owners quickly found that the turbo system required constant monitoring and maintenance, a demand that many were unprepared for. The novelty of driving a turbocharged car quickly wore off when faced with the reality of a vehicle that could easily overheat, lose power, or even break down. The Jetfire's performance woes didn't stop there. The car's mechanical issues were exacerbated by its need for a unique fuel blend. To make the most of its turbocharged engine, the Jetfire required a special mix of high-octane gasoline and a proprietary additive known as turbo rocket fuel. This necessity not only made fueling the car inconvenient, but also limited its appeal in an era when consumers sought simplicity and reliability. The combination of performance problems, maintenance headaches, and complicated fueling requirements resulted in a vehicle that was difficult to own and operate, causing potential buyers to shy away. Beyond the mechanical challenges, the Jetfire's design did little to instill confidence in its sporty aspirations. While the name suggested a sleek, cutting-edge automobile, the car's appearance was far more mundane. The Jetfire featured an unremarkable body that lacked the aggressive stance and sharp lines that characterize true sports cars. The overall aesthetic felt more akin to a standard coupe than a high-performance machine, which did a disservice to the bold engineering ambitions that lay beneath its hood. Despite the promise of speed and excitement implied by its name, the Jetfire presented a design that felt rather pedestrian, failing to capture the imagination of potential buyers. In an era dominated by competition from muscle cars and sporty imports, the Jetfire struggled to carve out its niche. With competitors like the Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Camaro capturing the hearts and minds of American drivers, the Jetfire found itself overshadowed. It simply didn't resonate with the muscle car crowd, which craved the raw power and aggressive styling that those competitors provided. The Jetfire's combination of underwhelming aesthetics and unreliable performance failed to generate the enthusiasm necessary for sales success. Oldsmobile's ambitious leap into turbocharging ultimately proved to be a commercial failure. The Jetfire's production run lasted only a couple of years, with fewer than 10,000 units sold. It was a bitter disappointment for a brand that had aimed to lead the charge into a new automotive frontier. By the time the Jetfire was discontinued in 1963, it had become evident that the promise of turbocharging was still largely unfulfilled, leaving behind a legacy that was more cautionary tale than triumph. In retrospect, the Oldsmobile Jetfire serves as an important reminder of the complexities of innovation. While the car was undeniably ahead of its time in its use of turbocharging technology, its flawed execution ultimately undermined its potential. The Jetfire represented a brave attempt to blend innovation with performance, but the reality was marred by mechanical failures and a lackluster design. It stood at the crossroads of ambition and practicality, illustrating the challenges that come with being a pioneer in a rapidly evolving automotive landscape. The Studebaker Lark, an ambitious entry into the compact car market during a time when smaller, more efficient vehicles were gaining traction, was intended to be a beacon of hope for a struggling American automaker. Launched in 1959, the Lark was Studebaker's response to the increasing popularity of European imports and the burgeoning demand for practical, fuel-efficient cars. Yet despite its good intentions, the Lark quickly became emblematic of the challenges facing not just Studebaker, but the American automotive industry as a whole during this period of transition. With its boxy design and conservative styling, the Lark failed to excite consumers and ultimately contributed to the company's decline. At its inception, the Lark aimed to capture the spirit of the compact car movement that was sweeping across the United States. In an era when consumers were becoming increasingly conscious of fuel efficiency and practicality, Studebaker sought to deliver a vehicle that could rival popular imports like the Volkswagen Beetle and the Renault Dauphine. The Lark was functional, offering decent interior space and a smooth ride, but it fell short in the areas that truly mattered to buyers: style and character. Instead of embracing the sleek, dynamic designs that characterized its European competitors, the Lark opted for a boxy silhouette that felt dated even upon release. It seemed as if Studebaker had missed an opportunity to innovate in a time when innovation was key to capturing consumer interest. The design of the Lark, with its straight lines and angular shape, lacked the flair that many buyers craved. While compact cars like the Lark were generally expected to prioritize functionality over aesthetics, the failure to incorporate any distinctive design elements made it blend into the background of the automotive landscape. There was nothing about the Lark that made it stand out. It was simply there, a car that offered transportation without any real passion or excitement. Its conservative styling reflected a company that seemed unsure of how to adapt to the rapidly changing market, leading to a perception of the Lark as a vehicle designed for those who valued practicality over personality. While the Lark was marketed as a compact car, it also struggled to find its place among a growing number of competitors. American consumers were being wooed by the charms of smaller, European imports, which often offered a sense of style and character that the Lark simply could not match. Brands like Volkswagen had managed to create an emotional connection with their audience, marketing their cars not just as modes of transportation, but as lifestyle choices. The Lark, in contrast, felt more like an obligation than an aspiration. It lacked the exuberance and youthful spirit that were becoming increasingly important to car buyers in the early 1960s. Functionality, however, was one area where the Lark excelled. It offered a spacious interior with comfortable seating for families and ample cargo space. This practicality made it a viable option for those looking for a reliable everyday vehicle. The Lark was available in various body styles, including sedans, coupes, and station wagons, which broadened its appeal to different segments of the market. Yet, even with its functional attributes, the Lark struggled to generate excitement. The marketing message was muddled, focusing on its practicality without adequately highlighting what could make it desirable beyond mere utility. Studebaker's financial challenges only compounded the difficulties facing the Lark. The company was already on a downward trajectory, grappling with increased competition and a shrinking market share. The Lark was meant to be a savior, but instead, it became just another model in a long line of missteps for the automaker. As production continued, the company's resources dwindled, limiting their ability to market the Lark effectively or make necessary design improvements. The combination of a lackluster product and a struggling company made for a perfect storm of failure. By the mid-1960s, the automotive landscape was shifting dramatically. The compact car market was becoming increasingly crowded, with more competitors entering the fray and offering stylish, innovative options that appealed to the evolving tastes of consumers. The Lark, however, had not kept pace. While competitors like the Ford Falcon and Chevrolet Nova were gaining popularity, the Lark seemed to be standing still, further solidifying its status as an outdated choice in an industry that was rapidly evolving. The AMC Rebel SST, an emblem of ambition for the American Motors Corporation during the height of the muscle car era, was introduced in 1967 with a promise of sportiness and style. It was meant to be a mid-size car that could capture the hearts of buyers looking for a blend of performance and practicality. Yet, as it hit the market, the Rebel SST struggled to live up to its sporty aspirations, presenting a design that was more blocky and awkward than sleek and dynamic. While it offered decent power under the hood, its clunky appearance and lack of distinctive personality ultimately hindered its ability to make a mark in an increasingly competitive landscape filled with more attractive options. From the outset, the Rebel SST was marketed as a sporty alternative to other mid-size cars, aiming to appeal to a younger demographic eager for excitement on the road. However, the reality was that its design fell flat. The SST featured a boxy silhouette that lacked the aerodynamic finesse and aggressive styling of its contemporaries. In an era where vehicles like the Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Camaro were defining the sporty aesthetic with their flowing lines and muscular forms, the Rebel SST appeared outdated and uninspired. Its shape resembled that of a box rather than a streamlined automobile, which did little to ignite the imagination of potential buyers. The interior of the Rebel SST, while spacious and comfortable, did not offer the excitement that one might expect from a car billed as sporty. The dashboard was utilitarian, and the overall design lacked the flair and character that set competitors apart. The seating was supportive, and there was ample room for passengers, but this practicality came at the cost of a truly engaging driving experience. It was as if AMC had prioritized function over form, neglecting the emotional connection that drivers sought in their vehicles. The Rebel SST was well suited for daily commutes and family outings, but it struggled to deliver the thrill that the sporty market craved. Under the hood, the Rebel SST had decent power, offering a variety of engine options that could deliver respectable performance. Its available V8 engines provided adequate acceleration, making it capable of holding its own in a straight line. However, the performance was not enough to compensate for its uninspiring design. While the SST could certainly deliver when pushed, the driving experience was not particularly engaging. The handling felt somewhat clunky, and the overall dynamics of the car did not foster a sense of excitement or connection to the road. For a car marketed as sporty, this lack of driving engagement was a significant shortcoming. In a time when the muscle car phenomenon was in full swing, the Rebel SST faced stiff competition from other manufacturers that were producing vehicles that not only offered power, but also embodied a sense of style and personality. Brands like Ford, Chevrolet, and Plymouth were capturing the attention of the market with cars that were not only fast, but also visually striking. The Rebel SST, however, seemed to exist in the shadows, struggling to find its place amid the flashy competition. Its boxy design and conservative styling left it feeling less like a contender and more like an afterthought in a crowded arena. The marketing efforts behind the Rebel SST, while aiming to promote its sporty image, struggled to convey the excitement that consumers sought. The advertisements may have highlighted its engine options and spacious interior, but they did little to mask the fact that the car lacked the visual drama and allure that characterized the most successful muscle cars of the time. In a marketplace driven by aesthetics and performance, the Rebel SST simply didn't resonate. Ultimately, the AMC Rebel SST stands as a testament to the complexities of automotive design and marketing. While it was a well-built car that offered decent power and practicality, its blocky design and lack of flair failed to capture the imagination of consumers. In an era that celebrated innovation and excitement, the Rebel SST felt like a relic of a bygone era, overshadowed by its more dynamic and stylish competitors. As the 1970s approached, the automotive landscape was shifting, with increasing pressure to adapt to new consumer preferences and stricter regulations. Unfortunately for the Rebel SST, it represented a moment in time when AMC was struggling to carve out its niche in a competitive market. Its failure to resonate with buyers only compounded the challenges faced by the automaker, which was already grappling with financial difficulties and dwindling market share. In hindsight, the Rebel SST serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and execution. It embodies the aspirations of a manufacturer striving to compete in a rapidly changing environment while highlighting the importance of design and emotional appeal in the automotive marketplace. The Ford Falcon sedan delivery occupies a unique niche in automotive history, representing a bold but ultimately flawed experiment in blending the characteristics of a sedan with those of a commercial van. Launched in the early 1960s, the Falcon sedan delivery was an intriguing concept, intended to cater to small business owners and tradespeople who needed a vehicle that could serve both personal and commercial purposes. However, the reality was that it fell short in both realms, leaving it stranded in a confusing middle ground that neither practical nor stylish consumers would embrace. At first glance, the Falcon sedan delivery's boxy design is immediately apparent. This angular shape, while utilitarian, lacked the charm and flair that were beginning to define the automotive landscape of the 1960s. The aesthetics were decidedly bland, presenting a stark contrast to the more dynamic, curvaceous vehicles that were capturing the public's imagination. While other cars of the era were showcasing sleek lines and sporty silhouettes, the Falcon's appearance felt dated and uninviting. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that turned heads. Rather, it was one that blended into the background, overlooked and underappreciated. In terms of functionality, the Falcon sedan delivery was meant to cater to the needs of small businesses, but its execution left much to be desired. The rear cargo area, while spacious, lacked the versatility and easy access that many commercial vehicles offered. The hatchback-style rear doors made loading and unloading cumbersome, and the vehicle's overall dimensions didn't lend themselves well to maneuvering in tight urban spaces. As a result, what was intended to be a practical solution for tradespeople became a frustrating experience, leading many to question whether it could truly serve as a reliable utility vehicle. Performance-wise, the Falcon sedan delivery was powered by a range of engine options that were adequate but unremarkable. The inline-6 and V8 engines provided decent power for everyday driving, but the vehicle's performance felt lackluster compared to the burgeoning excitement of muscle cars and more spirited compact options. Acceleration was tepid and the handling was uninspired, characteristics that did little to enhance its appeal, whether as a family sedan or a workhorse for small businesses. It simply didn't provide the excitement that drivers sought in their vehicles, making it a hard sell in an increasingly competitive market. Moreover, the Falcon sedan delivery's identity crisis became a significant barrier to its success. It was marketed as a combination of sedan and utility vehicle, but it struggled to excel in either category. For everyday consumers looking for a family car, its lack of aesthetic appeal and practical design left much to be desired. Conversely, for businesses seeking a reliable work vehicle, the awkward cargo area and limited functionality were serious drawbacks. The Falcon sedan delivery, in essence, was caught between two worlds, neither fish nor fowl, and failed to fully satisfy the needs of either demographic. In an era when many automakers were finding success with clearly defined models, the Falcon sedan delivery's ambiguous role only served to further diminish its appeal. Consumers were becoming increasingly discerning, favoring vehicles that offered a blend of style, performance, and practicality. With its utilitarian design and lackluster features, the Falcon simply didn't resonate. As other manufacturers rolled out models that catered specifically to family needs or commercial demands, the Falcon sedan delivery felt increasingly out of place, reinforcing its status as an oddity in Ford's lineup. Ultimately, the Ford Falcon sedan delivery stands as a testament to the challenges of innovation in the automotive industry. While it was an ambitious attempt to merge the functionalities of two distinct vehicle types, its execution fell flat. The awkward design, mediocre performance, and lack of clear identity contributed to its commercial struggles, leading to a limited production run and quick obscurity. Today, the Falcon sedan delivery may be seen as a quirky relic of automotive history, a reminder of a time when manufacturers were experimenting with new ideas in an ever-evolving market. While it didn't achieve the success Ford had hoped for, it reflects the complexities of meeting consumer needs and highlights the importance of creating vehicles that resonate on both functional and emotional levels. In the end, the Falcon sedan delivery remains an intriguing footnote in the history of American cars, an experiment that, despite its shortcomings, adds richness to the tapestry of automotive innovation. By 1960, the Edsel brand was emblematic of ambition turned tragedy in the American automotive landscape. Launched with great fanfare in 1958, Edsel was envisioned as a revolutionary brand designed to capture the hearts of consumers with its bold styling and innovative features. However, by the dawn of the new decade, it had become painfully clear that Edsel was on life support, and the Ranger model was, regrettably, one of the final nails in its coffin. With its uninspired design and lack of direction, the Ranger epitomized the brand's dramatic decline, illustrating how quickly the promise of innovation can dissipate into mediocrity. The Ranger's styling was a stark contrast to the ambitious designs of earlier Edsel models, which had aimed to create a distinct identity within the Ford family. Gone were the striking lines and daring aesthetics that had once drawn attention. In their place was a bland and generic look that failed to excite. The front grille, often criticized for its peculiar shape, seemed to epitomize everything that had gone wrong with the brand. What was once an attempt to forge a unique identity now appeared as a confusing jumble, leaving consumers bewildered rather than intrigued. The heavy, boxy body further compounded the issue, making the Ranger feel dated even before it hit the market. This lack of coherent design not only diminished its visual appeal, but also reflected a brand that had lost its creative spark. Performance-wise, the Ranger was hardly remarkable. It offered a range of engines that were adequate but uninspired, lacking the excitement that consumers had come to expect from the burgeoning muscle car movement. In a market where competitors were pushing the envelope with powerful engines and exhilarating driving experiences, the Ranger felt like a ghost of what could have been. Its sluggish performance and mediocre handling made it hard for buyers to see it as a compelling choice, especially when compared to more dynamic offerings from rival manufacturers. As Edsel struggled to find its footing, it was clear that buyers had grown wary of the brand. The initial excitement that surrounded its launch had evaporated, and the once enthusiastic consumers who had eagerly anticipated its arrival were now avoiding it in droves. The brand's reputation had been marred by a series of missteps, and the Ranger stood as a painful reminder of those failures. It was a vehicle that did not capture the imagination, leaving potential buyers feeling indifferent at best. The decline of Edsel was not merely a failure of a single model, it was a reflection of larger issues within the automotive industry during that era. The late 1950s and early 1960s saw significant changes in consumer preferences, with an increasing emphasis on style, performance, and reliability. Unfortunately, Edsel had not adapted to these shifts effectively. The Ranger in many ways represented a culmination of the brand's inability to pivot and innovate in a rapidly changing market. By the time the 1960 model year arrived, it was evident that the end was near for Edsel. The Ranger, meant to be a beacon of hope for a struggling brand, instead highlighted its profound missteps and the disconnect between its ambitions and execution. As sales plummeted and consumer interest waned, it became increasingly clear that Edsel's once promising future had been extinguished. The legacy of the Ranger and the Edsel brand is one of cautionary tales in the automotive world. It serves as a reminder of the importance of maintaining a clear vision and adapting to consumer desires. In an industry where style and performance reign supreme, the failure to innovate and connect with the audience can lead to rapid decline. The Edsel Ranger's uninspired design and lack of direction were symptomatic of a brand that had lost its way, marking the end of an ambitious chapter in American automotive history. Today, the story of Edsel and the Ranger serves as a poignant reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in the world of business. While the initial dreams of grandeur have faded into the annals of history, the lessons learned from this ambitious yet ultimately unsuccessful endeavor continue to resonate within the automotive industry. The Ranger stands as a testament to what happens when a brand fails to evolve, and it remains a notable, if unfortunate, part of the rich tapestry of American automotive lore. These 13 worst and silliest American cars from the 1960s remind us that not every idea from the automotive golden age was a winner. While some of these cars were innovative, others were just bizarre, and many were quickly forgotten. Which car on this list do you think is the silliest? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more quirky car history